The first time my family tried to steal my house, they brought a casserole, a notary, and my brother's smile. That smile should have required a warning label because it had been getting responsible adults to make stupid decisions for 37 years. I stood in the conference room of Whitaker and Sons Construction, with rain drying on my jacket, and watched papers spread across the mahogany table, like somebody had already planned my surrender. My mother, Evelyn, sat at the head of the table in pearl earrings, wearing the wounded expression she used when she wanted witnesses to confuse manipulation with heartbreak. Grant leaned by the window, relaxed in the way men look relaxed when everyone else has always paid for their emergencies. Aunt Marlene had brought the casserole. A notary I had never met sat near the corner, uncapping a pen. That was when my nervous system stopped being a daughter and became an assessment team. "Mara," my mother said, "thank God you came." She always thanked God right before asking me to bleed quietly. I looked at Grant. "Why is there a notary here?" Nobody answered fast enough. Grant gave a little laugh. "Relax, Major. It is just paperwork." I had left the Army 7 months earlier, but he still called me Major whenever he wanted discipline to sound like a defect. "Paperwork for what?" Evelyn folded her hands. "For the company. For the family." In my family, for the family usually meant Grant had caused damage and I had been invited to finance the cleanup. I stayed near the door because years in combat engineering teach you not to walk deep into unstable structures before checking the load points. His map still watched from the walls. After he died, my mother let Grant inherit the name, the office, and the mythology. I inherited expectations. Grant was the future. I was the useful one. "Sit down," Evelyn said. "We need to discuss this calmly." Calmly was another family word that meant quietly, preferably while surrendering. I did not sit. I picked up the top page. The title read, "Emergency Stabilization Agreement." Beautiful phrase. It sounded like something engineers would use for a damaged bridge, not a grown man with expensive shoes and no relationship with consequences. My eyes moved down the page. Loan restructuring, personal guarantee, collateral. Then I saw the address. My address. The little blue-gray house I had bought near the Colorado Springs foothills, with a cracked porch step, a stubborn furnace, and the first locked door in my life that belonged only to me. For a second, the room became still like the moment before a structure fails. "Why is my house listed as collateral?" I asked. The notary suddenly found the wall fascinating. Grant pushed away from the window. "Because you have equity, and we need temporary coverage." Temporary. My family used that word the way toddlers use markers on white carpet, confidently and with no cleanup plan. "I bought that house 18 days ago." "Exactly," Grant said. "It is clean. No lien, no complication." Sometimes audacity is so pure it deserves a laboratory. My mother stepped in. "Your brother is under tremendous pressure. The city contract delay has hurt cash flow." "Cash flow does not require my deed." Grant's smile thinned. "Do not make this dramatic." I opened the folder farther. Highlighted tabs marked where I was supposed to sign. My full legal name had already been typed beneath the signature lines. Mara Elaine Whitaker, homeowner, guarantor, backup generator. "You prepared this before asking me." Evelyn's eyes softened. "We knew you would need time to process." "No, you knew I would say no." Silence moved around the table. Aunt Marlene said, "Honey, you have always been the strong one." There it was, the old invoice dressed as a compliment. Strong meant available. Strong meant quiet. Strong meant your pain was less urgent because you handled it better. "Being strong does not make my house community property," I said. Grant laughed sharply. "You are acting like we are strangers." Strangers usually ask before putting my address in loan documents. My mother's face tightened. She hated when facts arrived with witnesses. That was why she had invited relatives and a notary. Evelyn believed audiences created obedience. For years she had been right. But the Army had taught me something useful. Pressure is not an order unless it comes from someone with authority. Nobody in that room had authority over my front door. Grant lowered his voice. "Listen, Mara, one signature buys us 90 days. Us? The company. Your company." His jaw flickered. Granddad wanted this to stay in the family. That one hit where he aimed it. When he was dying, he squeezed my hand and said, "Never stand under a load that is not yours, Mara." At 19, I thought he meant cranes. At 34, I knew better. I turned another page, and the language changed. Indemnification, misrepresentation, prior technical submissions, My pulse slowed. That is how I know I am becoming dangerous. Anger makes people fast. Focus makes them accurate. Halfway down, a project summary referenced a structural risk model I recognized because I had written the original 12 years earlier, sitting on a barracks floor with cheap coffee and mud on my boots. It had been a training analysis, never intended for civilian bidding, and definitely never intended to decorate Grant's failing empire. Then I saw Exhibit C, a proposal page bearing my name under technical consultant, my name, my credentials, my military title. At the bottom sat a signature that looked like mine, if mine had been forged by someone who thought women signed documents during earthquakes. The room narrowed to that page. Who signed this? Grant stopped smiling. Evelyn inhaled through her nose. Grant recovered first. You reviewed concepts for me years ago. I reviewed nothing for this bid. It is family knowledge. It is fraud with a reunion discount. The notary began putting his pen away. My mother stood, voice trembling. Mara, do not do this. Your brother could lose everything. I held up the page. Then he should not have used my name to build it. Grant's face darkened. You owe this family. And there it was, finally said without perfume or prayer. Oh, not love, not respect, debt. I set the folder down, perfectly square. No, I said. I used to be the emergency fund. I used to be the quiet signature. I used to be the daughter who absorbed impact so Grant could keep looking successful. That version of me did not survive active duty. I took a photo of the forged page. Grant lunged for the folder, but I put one hand on it first. Do not, I said. The room went silent. Grant stepped back. I slid the document into my bag. Evelyn whispered, If you walk out, you are turning your back on your blood. I opened the conference room door and looked at the family that had confused my stability with permission for too long. No, I said. I am turning toward real evidence. Outside, thunder rolled over Colorado Springs, and my phone buzzed with an email from an address ending in defense.gov. I did not open the email immediately because most people do not ignore messages from the Department of Defense during a family ambush. But trauma has strange priorities. My hands were steady, my breathing was even, and behind me, Grant was already performing outrage for an audience. I walked to my truck, locked the door, and sat there while rain blurred the Whitaker and Sons sign. Sons, plural. That had always been the joke nobody admitted was a joke. There was only one son, Grant, but the company carried a future large enough for him to ruin repeatedly. I was not in the name. I was in the margins, the receipts, the quiet transfers nobody mentioned at Christmas, and before all of that, before the army, before the forged signature, before my mother learned to say family like a weapon, there was my grandfather, Elias Whitaker, the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was not a backup plan. He smelled like sawdust, coffee, and old drafting paper. When I was 8, he caught me tracing bridge diagrams in one of his manuals while Grant outside was throwing rocks at windows. Instead of telling me not to touch his things, Granddad pulled up a chair and said, If you are going to study load paths, study them correctly. That was the first time an adult in my family mistook my curiosity for something valuable instead of inconvenient. He taught me how arches carried compression, how trusses distributed force, how weak points rarely announce themselves honestly. Structures lie politely before they fail, he said once. So do people. Grant was 13 then. Already handsome in a way adults forgave. He broke a neighbor's mailbox with a baseball bat and cried when confronted. Not because he felt guilty, but because consequences had interrupted his afternoon. My mother paid for the mailbox and said boys needed room to make mistakes. I asked why girls did not need the same room. Evelyn looked at me like I had passed gas in church. Do not be difficult, Mara. Difficult became my first family title. Grant was spirited. Grant was ambitious. Grant was under pressure. I was difficult, rigid, argumentative, too serious, too sharp, too much like Granddad when I asked where the money went or why rules changed depending on who broke them. By 12, I understood our household accounting system perfectly. Grant generated debt in every category imaginable: emotional, financial, social, legal adjacent. I generated solutions. If he forgot a school project, I built it. If he dented the truck, I lied about hearing hail. If he stole $20 from my mother's purse, Evelyn asked if I had seen anything, and I learned that truth could make dinner unbearable for 3 days. Granddad noticed. One Sunday afternoon, after Grant lost $200 selling fake concert tickets to classmates, Evelyn cried like the world had attacked her favorite child personally. I was 14, and she told me to give Grant the money I had saved from tutoring younger kids in math. "He made a mistake," she said. "You are better with money." That sentence should have been carved over our front door. You are better with money, so you do not need yours. I handed over the cash because guilt is easiest to install when children are small enough to confuse obedience with love. Later, Granddad found me behind his workshop, furious and embarrassed because I had cried, where sawdust could witness it. He sat beside me on an overturned bucket and said nothing for a while. That was his gift. He did not rush pain so he could feel useful. Finally, he said, "A bridge that carries every truck eventually cracks." I wiped my face with my sleeve and said, "Then what am I supposed to do?" He looked toward the house, where Grant's laughter floated through an open window like nothing had happened. Learn the difference between support and sacrifice. Support helps something stand. Sacrifice disappears so something else can pretend it is stable. I did not understand all of it then. I understood enough to remember. When Granddad got sick, the family became suddenly holy about legacy. Evelyn used words like stewardship and heritage, which sounded noble until I realized they meant Grant would inherit anything with visible value. Granddad fought it quietly. He tried to teach me faster. Like a man racing a clock nobody else admitted was ticking. He showed me old project files, bridge inspections, drainage plans, calculations written in his square handwriting. "Your mind sees systems," he told me. "Do not let them shame you for that." Grant called it boring. My mother called it sweet that I had a hobby. Granddad called it aptitude, and that distinction kept me alive longer than anyone knew. He died in November, during the first hard freeze. The hospital room was too warm. His hand felt lighter than it should have when he squeezed mine. "Never stand under a load that is not yours," he whispered. I thought he was confused from medication. Now I think dying people sometimes become brutally efficient. At the funeral, Grant cried loudly. Evelyn accepted sympathy beautifully. I stood near the back, numb in a black dress that felt borrowed from someone softer. 3 weeks later, my mother called a family meeting at the kitchen table. Granddad had left me a small education fund, enough to help with engineering school applications. Evelyn slid the paperwork toward me with red eyes and said Grant needed it temporarily because a business opportunity had gone sideways. He had invested in equipment he could not afford, for a company he did not own yet, based on advice from a man he met at a golf simulator. "Granddad wanted us to take care of each other," she said. "Grant is drowning." I stared at the number, then at my brother, who would not meet my eyes. "That money was for school." Evelyn's voice hardened slightly. "Family comes before ambition." Ambition. When Grant wanted a company, it was destiny. When I wanted an education, it was selfish decoration. I signed because I was 17 and still believed a final sacrifice might purchase permanent love. It purchased 32 days of peace. Then Grant needed more. The night I decided to enlist, I was sitting on Granddad's workshop floor, opening a dented metal box he had kept beneath his drafting table. Inside were pencils, field notebooks, an old compass, and an envelope with my name written across it. "Mara, in case they make you doubt what you know." My hands shook before I opened it. The letter was only 1 page, but it changed the architecture of my life. He wrote that I was not cold, I was observant. I was not difficult, I was accurate. He wrote that some families build one child into a monument and use another as scaffolding, then act offended when the scaffolding wants a life. I finally understood everything then. At the bottom, in handwriting weaker than the rest, he had added one final line. "One day, they will not just take your money, sweetheart. They will try to take your name." The next morning, I walked into a recruiting office with Granddad's letter folded inside my jacket and no dramatic speech prepared. Movies make enlistment look like a thunderclap of patriotism. Flags moving in slow motion, music swelling, somebody discovering purpose beneath fluorescent lights. Mine looked more like a girl with $200, a dead grandfather, and a family that had mistaken her future for petty cash. The recruiter asked why I wanted the army. I almost gave him the polite answer about service and challenge. Instead, exhaustion made me honest. I need structure that does not change depending on who is crying. He stared at me for half a second, then slid the forms across the desk. Smart man. Basic training did not feel easy, but it felt clean. That surprises people who have never lived in emotional fog. The yelling had rules. The punishment had causes. If your bed was wrong, your bed was wrong. Nobody said your blanket corner failed because you lacked compassion for your brother's entrepreneurial journey. Nobody took your boots and called it family sacrifice. I learned quickly because reality finally held still long enough to study it. Push-ups were push-ups. A rucksack weighed what it weighed. A drill sergeant did not care who your mother favored. I loved that more than I admitted. My mother hated it immediately. Her first letter said she hoped military life would not make me hard. The second said Grant felt abandoned. The third included a bill he needed help with because his truck transmission had chosen a terrible time to fail, as if machines had personal vendettas against Whitaker men. I did not send money. That small silence felt illegal at first. Then it felt like oxygen. After basic, I trained as a combat engineer. And for the first time, every strange part of me became useful. My habit of checking exits, calculating stress, noticing weak points, and distrusting beautiful explanations suddenly had a uniform. We learned demolitions, route clearance, bridge assessment, field fortifications, and how fast one bad assumption could kill people who trusted your math. I was not the strongest soldier in every room, or the loudest, or the most charming. Charm had always been Grant's battlefield. Accuracy became mine. The first officer who seemed to understand that was Captain David Mercer, before the promotions and gray hair turned him into Colonel Mercer, professional destroyer of excuses. He caught me recalculating a load table after a field exercise because something about the instructor's example bothered me. "Problem, Whitaker?" he asked. I expected criticism. Instead, I pointed at the numbers and said, "The soil saturation factor is optimistic." He looked at the page, looked at the mud swallowing our boots, and gave me the smallest nod I had ever seen. From Mercer, that was affection. "Then brief it," he said. I did. Half the platoon rolled their eyes until rain came hard that night, and the training bridge settled exactly where I predicted. After that, people still teased me, but they listened when I said something would not hold. That is the closest thing engineers have to applause. Years passed in miles, deployments, night movements, bad coffee, temporary structures, and the kind of friendships built when everyone has seen everyone else miserable and nobody uses it as leverage. I became good at evaluating damage without becoming damage. That mattered during the Missouri River floods, the mission that changed everything while appearing. At first, like another long day in wet boots, civilian crews had assembled a temporary span over a washed-out crossing so emergency vehicles could reach 3 trapped communities beyond the river bend. The schedule was brutal. Water was rising. Local officials were scared. Reporters hovered outside the perimeter looking for disaster with good lighting. A contractor in a clean, hard hat assured everyone the bridge would hold light convoy traffic. The math disagreed. More accurately, the math screamed. I walked the bank twice, checked the anchorage, studied the current, and felt that old granddad warning move through my ribs. Structures lie politely before they fail. The contractor kept saying the design was rated above requirement. He was not wrong in a dry world fantasy where riverbanks stayed where drawings placed them. But the downstream scour had eaten more support than his model allowed, and the soil near the western approach had turned into pudding wearing gravel as a costume. I brought it to Mercer, who was by then a major with the exhausted patience of a man who had heard too many confident idiots near dangerous water. "How sure?" he asked. "Sure enough to stop the ambulances." His eyes sharpened. That was the thing about real leaders. They did not ask whether the truth was convenient. They asked whether it was true. We halted the convoy. The contractor exploded. A county official accused us of delaying evacuation. Someone said lives were at stake, which was impressive, because that was exactly my argument. I spread my field notes across the hood of a Humvee while rain hammered the paper soft. My hands were freezing, but my voice stayed level. I showed the erosion line, the shifted bearing, the load sequence, the failure point that would occur after the first heavy vehicle, maybe the second if God liked irony. Mercer listened, then turned to the contractor. "Can you disprove her?" The man talked for 90 seconds without answering. Mercer looked at me. "What do you need? Steel mats, 2 dozers, a crane team, and 4 hours nobody wants to give me." He gave me 3.5. We built in rain so hard it erased the horizon. Soldiers moved like ghosts through floodlight and mud. I remember shouting measurements, my boots sinking, my gloves slick, my whole body narrowed to angles, weight, timing. When the first ambulance crossed, nobody cheered. We were too tired and too afraid to tempt physics. When the 10th crossed, Mercer exhaled beside me and said, "Good call, Whitaker. 2 words. Enough. Later, after the communities were cleared and the original approach collapsed exactly where I had marked it, the contractor stopped making eye contact. The report went upward because saved lives create paperwork almost as reliably as failed bridges. Mercer told me my analysis would be reviewed at levels where people used better pens and worse chairs. Do not talk about it outside channels, he said. Operational details, liability, interagency politics. You know the dance. I knew enough. My mother received the public version, which was nothing. Grant received even less. Still, months later, during a rare visit home, he asked oddly specific questions about temporary spans, flood response, and emergency stabilization language. I thought he was pretending interest to sound successful. That was generous of me. He complimented my discipline, asked whether military reports were public, and smiled when I told him most of the useful parts stayed buried. I remember noticing the smile because it looked less like admiration than inventory, but I was still tired enough from deployment to call that suspicion unkind. I would learn much better very soon. Leaving the army felt less like freedom than decompression. People expect discharge papers to transform you instantly into a civilian, as if years of waking before sunrise, checking corners, reading weather, reading faces, and measuring risk simply evaporate because someone hands you a folder and says thank you for your service. Mine did not evaporate. It followed me to Colorado Springs in 2 duffel bags, a filing box, and the habit of sleeping lightly even in a house with new locks. I bought the place near the foothills because it looked unremarkable from the street and solid where it mattered. Blue-gray siding, a porch step that complained in cold weather, a kitchen window facing Pikes Peak, and a basement dry enough to make an engineer emotional. The realtor called it charming. I called it defensible. I paid for the inspection myself, read every line, negotiated the roof repair, and signed the closing documents alone. No audience, no family blessing, no. Grant leaning over my shoulder asking whether I really needed that much space. When the keys hit my palm, I did not cry. I went home, changed the locks, and sat on the empty living room floor eating takeout from the carton while the furnace made a sound like an elderly tractor. It was the most peaceful dinner I had ever had. My mother called that night. I knew because the screen lit up beside me 3 times, then Grant, then Aunt Marlene. I let all of them ring. Silence, I had learned, was not rude. Silence was sometimes a perimeter. 2 weeks later, I registered my consulting business, Whitaker Infrastructure Risk, a name my mother called unnecessarily severe. Evelyn preferred softer names that suggested I existed to soothe rather than evaluate. Grant said it sounded like I was trying to scare clients. That was interesting criticism from a man whose company slogan was building trust. Since 1984, despite having treated trust like a renewable resource, he could strip mine. My first clients were small municipalities, insurance adjusters, and one school district with a retaining wall doing things retaining walls should not do near children. The work was not glamorous, but it was honest. Bridges either carried the load or they did not. Drainage either moved water away from foundations or politely prepared lawsuits. I liked problems that could not cry their way out of physics. For a while, I thought distance might function like healing. Then my family rediscovered my phone number with religious commitment. Evelyn started with concern. Was I eating? Was I lonely? Did I know Grant had been under pressure since the city delayed payment on the Northgate project? Concern became weather report, became request. Grant just needed a little cash flow support. Grant just needed me to look over one proposal. Grant just needed my military contacts to understand he was doing patriotic infrastructure work. A phrase so oily I nearly dropped my coffee. I said no each time. The first no came out too carefully, like I was carrying glass. The 5th no had muscle. By the 10th, my mother stopped pretending she was checking on my vegetables and started calling me cold. You came back different, she said one evening. I was standing in my basement labeling boxes because organized storage is cheaper than therapy. Different how? Harder, less patient. The army took something from you. I looked at Granddad's compass on the shelf above my workbench. No, I said. It returned several things. She sighed the sigh of a mother disappointed that guilt had missed its landing zone. Grant is your brother. I remember. Then act like it. That phrase sat in the air like spoiled milk. Acting like his sister had once meant paying late fees, editing bids at midnight, lying to neighbors, surrendering savings, and pretending Grant's confidence was not just panic in a tailored jacket. I ended the call. She sent a text 5 minutes later. I pray you learn compassion before regret teaches you. I screenshotted it, not because it hurt, but because patterns deserve archives. The pressure escalated slowly, as family pressure usually does. Nobody begins by asking for your house. They begin by asking for understanding, then flexibility, then one small favor, then a favor shaped like a signature. Grant left voicemail messages full of brotherly warmth and corporate desperation. He said the city contract was trapped in review, vendors were being unreasonable, banks did not understand seasonal construction cycles. He never used words like overextended, mismanaged, or falsified, which meant those words were probably closer to the truth. I kept building my business. I inspected culverts, wrote reports, and learned which clients valued honesty before invoices. Tessa Monroe, my first civilian friend who did not come from blood or a chain of command, helped me design a website and told me my professional photo looked like I had just convicted a bridge of treason. I liked her immediately. She was a mechanical engineer with purple reading glasses, 3 rescue dogs, and the rare ability to offer help without attaching debt to it. Your family sounds like a sinkhole with holiday cards, she said after I summarized them one Friday over tacos. Accurate woman. Then came the email from Darnell Pike, a project manager I had met during flood response years earlier. Subject line: quick question on Whitaker Northgate submission. My stomach tightened before I opened it. Darnell was careful, which meant the question would not be casual. Mara, he wrote, sorry to bother you, but your name appears as technical consultant on a resilience appendix submitted by Whitaker and Sons. The methodology resembles the temporary span assessment you briefed during the Missouri River response. Did you authorize this? I read the message 3 times. Then I opened the attached PDF. There it was. My language, my framework, my load sequence logic, civilianized and polished badly, like someone had stolen a uniform and worn it over pajamas. At the bottom of the appendix sat Mara E. Whitaker, Major, U.S. Army, retired, technical review consultant. Retired was wrong. I had separated honorably, not retired. Grant had even stolen my status inaccurately, which felt on brand. I forwarded the document to myself, downloaded a copy, and began comparing it against my old field notes. Page by page, the theft became clearer. He had not merely borrowed ideas, he had used my name to give credibility to a bid he was not qualified to defend. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet, because apparently family betrayal becomes easier to understand once it has columns. At 12:34 a.m., my inbox chimed again. This time the sender ended in defense.gov. The subject read, Formal Invitation, Pentagon Engineering, Recognition Ceremony. I sat motionless in my quiet kitchen while the mountains outside disappeared into dark. Then my phone buzzed with my mother's name, and her text arrived like a flare over enemy ground. We know about Washington. The family is coming, and you will not embarrass Grant. I stared at that sentence until the words stopped looking like English and started looking like instructions from a command I had never agreed to obey. Then I opened a new folder named Grant Evidence. By sunrise, Grant Evidence contained 18 files, 3 screenshots, 2 scanned letters, and a level of emotional clarity that would have cost thousands in therapy if my brother had not provided it for free through fraud. I did not sleep much that night. Sleep felt too trusting. Instead, I made coffee, opened every old external drive I owned, and rebuilt the timeline. Missouri River field notes, my original risk matrix, Darnell Pike's email, the Northgate appendix, Grant's forged consultant page, my mother's text about Washington. Everything went into folders with names so plain they sounded boring enough to survive court. That is the thing manipulative people misunderstand about evidence. It does not need drama, it needs dates. At 7:12 a.m., Colonel David Mercer called. He did not say hello. He said, "You saw the invitation." I saw the invitation and a possible felony wearing my last name. A pause. Grant? Grant. Mercer exhaled through his nose. The old sound of an officer discovering civilians had made paperwork disgusting again. Send me what you have. Already packaged. Of course it is. From him, that was almost tenderness. I forwarded the files while standing at my kitchen counter, watching early light cut across the floorboards. My house was still half unpacked, boxes stacked beside the wall like small honest monuments to a life I had not finished arranging. That was what angered me most. I was not rich. I was not powerful. I had one stable home, one young business, and a future built plank by plank out of paychecks, discipline, and saying no to comfort so I could buy freedom later. My family had looked at that and seen available collateral. At 9, my mother called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail in her soft public voice, which meant she expected it to be replayed someday. Mara, sweetheart, I know things felt tense yesterday, but Washington is bigger than our disagreements. Your brother needs this room. Important people will be there. We all need to present a united front. United front. Another military phrase stolen by people who had never respected a chain of command unless guilt sat at the top of it. Grant called next. His voicemail had no softness. Do not start something you cannot control. You know how these events work. People network, people talk. If you humiliate me in front of federal contacts, you are hurting the entire family. Interesting, because when he forged my name, apparently the family felt wonderfully intact. By noon, Aunt Marlene texted that she had already bought a navy dress for the ceremony and hoped I would not bring soldier tension into a sacred opportunity. Nobody asked why I had been invited. Nobody asked what the ceremony honored. They assumed my recognition, whatever it was, existed to decorate Grant's rescue. That had always been our family's emotional architecture. Grant took the visible rooms, and I became load, bearing behind the walls. I answered none of them. Instead, I called Tessa. She arrived 20 minutes later with breakfast burritos and the expression of a woman prepared to help bury either a body or a lie. "Show me the theft," she said, setting coffee on my table. I liked efficient friendships. We spent 3 hours building a clean comparison packet. My original notes on the left, Grant's submission on the right. Identical sequence logic. Identical terminology. Identical error where I had abbreviated a local road name incorrectly during the flood because I was writing in rain at 2 a.m. Grant had copied even the mistake. "That is almost touching," Tessa said. "He plagiarized you faithfully." I laughed harder than the joke deserved because sometimes sanity returns through sarcasm. Mercer called again that evening. His voice had shifted into formal mode. "Mara, the ceremony will proceed as planned. Your recognition is not public yet outside the invitation chain. There will be senior engineering leadership, Department of Defense representatives, civilian partners, and press. Wonderful. Nothing lowers family drama like federal lighting." "Listen to me." I did. "Do not confront him privately before the event. If he tries to leverage your name in that building, let the record correct him. That sounds suspiciously like you telling me not to punch my brother." "I am telling you paperwork hits harder and leaves fewer fingerprints." Wise man. 2 days later, Evelyn and Grant appeared at my house uninvited, because boundaries apparently looked to them like suggestions printed in pale ink. I saw them on the doorbell camera before they knocked. Grant wore a charcoal suit, my mother a cream coat, and the fragile smile of a woman entering battle with lip gloss. I opened the door but did not move aside. This detail mattered. People like my family treated doorways as emotional gray areas. "We need to talk about Washington," Evelyn said. "We are talking from here." Her eyes flicked past me into the house. Inventory instinct. Grant held up a folder. I prepared some remarks. Of course he had. He pushed the folder toward me. I took it because evidence sometimes arrives gift-wrapped. The first page was a short speech introducing Whitaker and Sons as a family legacy devoted to resilient infrastructure. The second page mentioned how Grant had encouraged his sister's military engineering interests. Encouraged. That word was doing illegal amounts of labor. The third page described his conceptual influence on emergency bridge stabilization during flood response. My ears went quiet. There it was, the plan. He did not merely want to survive Washington. He wanted to harvest it. Evelyn touched my sleeve. I stepped back just enough that her hand fell away. "Mara, this event could restore confidence in the company." "It is not a company event." Grant smiled. "Everything is an opportunity if you understand business." "You mean theft?" His face tightened. Evelyn whispered, "Please do not be ugly." That was my mother's favorite way of telling me truth, looked bad on people she loved. I closed the folder. "You will not use my service record to launder your bid fraud." Grant's calm broke for 1 second. "You cannot prove fraud." I almost thanked him for clarifying the category. "Instead," I said, "then you should feel very relaxed." He did not. They left after 20 minutes of circling the same demand. Smile, stand with family, protect Grant, absorb damage. When their car pulled away, I scanned his speech, added it to grant evidence, and printed 3 copies of everything. The morning we flew to Washington, D.C., I wore my dark blue suit, low heels, and Granddad's compass tucked in my bag. My mother texted airport instructions as if I were a difficult intern. Grant posted a photo from the terminal captioned, "Honored to represent Whitaker legacy in D.C." I saved that too. At the Pentagon entrance, he walked half a step ahead of me, already performing ownership of a room he had not earned. "Remember," he murmured, "let me handle introductions." Then a uniformed officer approached, snapped a salute, and said, "Major Whitaker, Colonel Mercer is waiting for you in the honored guest suite." Grant stopped walking. My mother's smile died so quickly, it practically made a sound. Grant looked at the saluting officer the way people look at an elevator that opens onto the ocean. My mother recovered first, because Evelyn Whitaker could survive anything except silence. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, smiling without her eyes. The officer glanced at her badge, then back at me. "No, ma'am. Major Whitaker is expected." Expected. Such a small word, but it hit my family like a structural report nobody had budgeted for. Grant's jaw tightened. I could see the calculation starting behind his face, the frantic rewriting of reality he had practiced since childhood. Maybe he could still walk beside me. Maybe he could still introduce himself as the family visionary. Maybe he could still turn my name into scaffolding before anyone noticed the theft. I looked at him, then at the folder beneath his arm, the one containing his remarks about legacy, influence, and other lies. "You can wait with the general guests," I said. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Colonel Mercer met me outside the honored guest suite wearing dress blues and the expression of a man who considered ceremony an unfortunate tax on competence. "You brought the circus," he said quietly. "The circus bought tickets." His eyes moved past me to Grant and my mother, standing near the security rope with Aunt Marlene and 2 cousins, all less confident. "Good," Mercer said. "Audiences improve accountability." The ceremony hall inside the Pentagon was smaller than people imagine and heavier than any room I had entered. Flags lined the stage. Rows of officers, engineers, officials, and press filled the chairs. On the screen was a photograph from the Missouri River flood response. Rain, floodlights, a temporary span, soldiers blurred by motion, water moving with the ugly patience of something that did not care who had authority. My stomach tightened when I saw it. Recognition is strange when you have spent your life being useful in rooms where nobody clapped. It feels less like glory and more like being seen under bright light. Mercer touched my elbow. "Breathe, Whitaker." "I am breathing." "You are conducting a load calculation with your face." That made me smile. We took our seats in the front row. Behind me, I could feel my family entering with the public guests. Grant did not sit immediately. He hovered near an aisle, scanning nameplates and uniforms, searching for someone useful to impress. My mother whispered something sharp. Then the program began. There were speeches about resilience, coordination, and language that makes government events sound less terrifying than the work they describe. I listened politely until the deputy secretary stepped to the podium and said my name. "Today we recognize Mara Elaine Whitaker for decisive technical judgment during the Missouri River emergency response, where her rapid field assessment and stabilization plan allowed evacuation vehicles to cross safely before a catastrophic approach failure." The room became still. Not empty still, focused still. Behind me, somebody inhaled sharply. I did not have to turn around to know it was my mother. The screen changed to a diagram, my diagram, cleaned up and formalized but unmistakably mine. The deputy secretary continued, explaining scour, saturation, load sequencing, and the collapse that followed after the final evacuation convoy cleared. Then Mercer rose. He did not read from notes. Mercer hated notes almost as much as excuses. Major Whitaker was not the loudest person at that site, he said. She was the most accurate. She challenged a contractor, halted a convoy, rebuilt a plan under pressure, and saved lives because she understood that confidence is not evidence. Evidence is evidence. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I thought of Granddad's workshop, of the overturned bucket, of his voice saying support helps something stand, sacrifice disappears. For years, I had disappeared so Grant could appear stable. Now the room was looking at the structure beneath the story. Her work has since informed updated field guidance for crossing assessments in flood conditions, Mercer said. This recognition is overdue. Overdue. Another small word with teeth. When I walked to the stage, the applause rose before I reached the steps. Then people stood. One row, then another, until the sound filled the hall and pressed against my ribs. I did not cry. I had learned too much control for that. But something in me unclenched so deeply it hurt. Across the room, Grant stood frozen, his face gray. Evelyn sat rigid, pearls bright against her throat, watching strangers give her difficult daughter the respect she had reserved for her failing son. After the certificate and medal, the reception began. Grant moved fast, because panic often wears expensive shoes. He cornered a journalist near the coffee table and began speaking in that smooth voice that had once convinced bankers, vendors, and my mother that potential was proof. I was halfway across the room when I heard him say, "Our family firm has always collaborated closely with Mara's engineering work." Mercer appeared beside me like judgment in polished shoes. "Shall we?" he asked. We walked over together. The journalist looked delighted, sensing blood. "Mr. Whitaker, were you involved in the Missouri River Stabilization Plan?" Grant smiled. "Conceptually, yes. Mara and I have always shared ideas." I opened my folder. My mother appeared at his side instantly. "This is not the place," she whispered. "Actually," Mercer said, "it is an excellent place." I handed the journalist copies of the original field report, the Northgate Appendix, Darnell Pike's email, and Grant's forged consultant page. Grant's face collapsed one layer at a time. "Those are private family documents," he snapped. "No," I said. "They are professional records connected to unauthorized use of my name." Mercer looked at the journalist, then at Grant. "For clarity, Mr. Whitaker was not present during the Missouri River mission, did not contribute to the assessment, and has no authorization to represent Major Whitaker's military engineering work as his own." The silence afterward was exquisite. Not loud, not theatrical, just the sound of a lie losing oxygen in federal air. Aunt Marlene stared at the carpet. My cousin stepped away from Grant, as if fraud were contagious. Evelyn's eyes filled, but no tears fell. Performance requires an audience willing to believe it, and hers had just resigned. "Mara," she whispered, "you are destroying your brother." I closed the folder. "No, I am removing my name from the wreckage." Grant backed away first, then my mother followed, smaller than I had ever seen her. Weeks later, my attorney sent notices. I refused the guarantee, corrected the bid record, and locked every door they had mistaken for family access. Back home, Tessa helped me hang the recognition on my office wall. Mercer sent a text. "Structure defended." Granddad would have liked that. If you have ever been treated like the strong one until strength became something everyone tried to take from you, remember this. You are allowed to stop carrying loads that were never yours. Tell me your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about boundaries, justice, and quiet people finally being seen, and never forget that real family does not ask you to disappear so someone else can stand taller.